welcome back to The Explainer, where we take the absolute wildest, most unbelievable facts from the natural world and break them down for you. So imagine for a second that you're out for a hike, right? You look down and you spot this small, seemingly innocent little frog, just sitting peacefully by a bubbling stream. You'd probably look at it and think it's just another harmless, fragile creature. Well, you need to see the truth about this animal before you walk away, because it hides a biological secret that sounds less like textbook biology and a lot more like a twisted sci-fi thriller. We're talking about a creature with a defense system that is, frankly, absolutely terrifying.
Okay, let's dive into this. When you think of a frog, what immediately comes to mind? A croak? Sitting on a lily pad? Catching flies? You definitely don't think of a biological defense system built on pure, unadulterated chaos. I mean, most animals have a hard limit on what they'll endure to survive. But the creature we're unpacking today, it completely throws all of those rules out the window. It doesn't rely on a thick armored shell, it doesn't have a toxic sting, and it definitely doesn't just play dead. It relies on a tactic so extreme it forces us to completely rethink what survival in the wild actually looks like.
Meet the hairy frog, or as it's far more accurately and famously known, the wolverine frog. I just want you to let that moniker sink in for a moment. We are directly comparing a tiny little amphibian to a real-life superhero famous for his violent, indestructible rage. And I'm telling you right now, that comparison is entirely earned. This isn't just some catchy internet nickname, it's a literal description of how this animal operates when its back is against the wall. It possesses a biological system that turns its own seemingly innocent body into a weapon of absolute last resort.
To really wrap our heads around how bizarre this is, let's just compare this tactic to your everyday normal frog. When a typical amphibian gets attacked by, say, a hungry snake or a predatory bird, it runs a pretty standard playbook. It's either going to rely on camouflage to hide, or it's going to use those powerful hind legs to jump away as fast as physically possible. It's basically a game of evasion. But the wolverine frog? No way. When it gets attacked, it doesn't just give up, and it certainly doesn't just try to hop away. It stands its ground and relies on a strategy of pure chaos and literally mutilates itself. It intentionally breaks the bones in its own toes.
All right, Section 1, the bone claws.
Now, what's really interesting about this is the sheer concept of these bone claws. Think about it for a second. This animal literally snaps its own skeletal structure just to force sharp, bony fragments to burst right through its own skin. The sheer willpower, or, biological programming, required to intentionally inflict that kind of trauma on yourself just to survive an attack, it's staggering. It takes the whole idea of a cornered animal fighting back to a totally new, deeply uncomfortable level. And what's truly terrifying here is what the weapon is actually made of. When we hear the word claws, we naturally think of cats or bears, or even our own fingernails, right? But those are normal claws made of keratin. That is absolutely not what's happening here. The wolverine frog is pushing razor-sharp bone out of its feet. It isn't growing a nail, it is weaponizing its own skeleton. It's this permanent internal arsenal that's only deployed through an act of extreme physical trauma.
To really grasp the monstrosity of this setup, listen to this quote comparing it to one of history's most terrifying predators, much like the Utah raptor, the prehistoric predator that used a 1-foot-long sword-like claw to nail its prey to the ground. I mean, that is the level of sheer violence we're talking about, just scaled down to the size of a little frog. It uses these protruding, razor-sharp bony spikes to indiscriminately slash and stab at absolutely anything trying to eat it. Just imagine being a bird, expecting a soft, squishy meal, and suddenly getting slashed across the face by an amphibian wielding its own shattered skeleton like a pair of daggers.
Moving right along to Section 2, Biomechanics of the Break.
Now, you might be sitting there wondering about the solid proof of how this biological mechanism physically functions, because frankly, it sounds impossible. It sounds like magic, but it's not. It is a highly evolved, calculated, and totally extreme defense mechanism. To really understand the intense, gritty anatomy of this creature, picture a medical examiner doing an investigation. You'd picture a post-mortem where they make that classic Y-shaped cut from the outside in, right, to investigate the internal organs. The examiner uses a scalpel to breach the skin from the exterior. Well, the wolverine frog's body completely reverses that process. It does the cutting from the inside out. There's no external force piercing the skin. The frog's own internal anatomy acts as the scalpel, literally tearing through its own flesh to reach the outside world.
So the crucial point is the highly mechanical, step-by-step process of the break itself. First, special muscles located at the very back of the foot contract with an immense amount of force. Second, because of this incredibly violent contraction, the bone inside the toe is rapidly pulled downward. Third, The tension simply becomes too much, and the bone violently snaps. Finally, that newly created razor-sharp bone fragment is pushed forcefully through the soft toe pads, emerging right into the open air. And just like that, boom, it turns its own innocent feet into lethal slashing weapons.
Which brings us perfectly to Section 3, Destruction and Regeneration.
So, that leaves us with a massive, highly logical question. Let's say the fight is over. The frog has successfully slashed the snake or the bird. The predator is shocked, bleeding, and has, hopefully, run away. What on earth happens to the frog now? It's just sitting there with its own bones protruding through its shattered skin. You'd naturally think this is a one-time defense that leaves the frog permanently crippled, right? Remarkably, no. The frog's body actually begins an absolutely incredible recovery process. First, those bony claws eventually retract right back into the foot. Second, the amphibian skin, which naturally happens to be incredibly resilient, heals completely over the open wounds. And finally, the biological cycle is completely reset and ready to repeat. It's this unending loop of destruction and regeneration. The frog literally just goes back to sitting quietly by the stream, totally healed, waiting for the next predator to make the absolute worst mistake of its life.
When you compare this to other extreme animal survival tactics out there, it puts things into a really wild perspective. Take the helmeted hornbill, for example. To protect itself and its young, that bird will literally trap itself inside a hollow tree cavity, sealing the entrance shut with mud. Now that sounds pretty extreme, right? But compared to the wolverine frog, the hornbill's tactic looks like a walk in the freaking park. While the bird simply builds a wall and hides inside a tree, our frog actively chooses to break its own skeletal structure and mutilate its own body to ensure its survival. It faces the threat head-on with pure, unfiltered aggression.
And this brilliantly illustrates the larger point of this entire explainer. This is the raw, untamed reality of nature that your school completely forgot to teach you. I mean, they showed us the food web, they showed us leaves changing color in the fall, but they conveniently left out the evolutionary marvel of amphibians turning their own skeletons into switchblades. It's a staggering display of biological adaptation. And yeah, it is deeply unsettling, for sure, but most importantly, it highlights the sheer, awe-inspiring lengths that life will go to just to survive. This is exactly why we dig into these topics, to uncover the magnificent, extreme facts hiding right there in the underbrush of our world.
Nature is infinitely more metal than we give it credit for. Listen, if you want to keep your own internal systems safely inside your body, you better hit that subscribe button right now. But seriously, before you go, all of this leaves us with one incredibly fascinating question to chew on. If evolution pushed this tiny, seemingly fragile frog to literally weaponize its own skeleton, what other completely impossible survival tactics are hiding right beneath our feet, just waiting to be discovered? Keep learning, stay curious, and we'll see you next time.